She said I made her feel grounded for the first time, but I should have realized that grounded was just her polite way of saying convenient. Looking back, I can see how perfectly I fit the role of the stable provider she needed, though at the time I thought we were building something real together. I met Arya at our college reunion in Austin, 3 years after graduating with my computer science degree and establishing myself as a network security analyst at a mid-sized tech firm. I was the kind of person who enjoyed the methodical work of protecting systems from cyber threats, finding satisfaction in the logical problem-solving that frustrated most people. My colleagues respected my expertise. I had a solid salary, good benefits, and a downtown loft that reflected my organized approach to life, everything in its place, bills paid automatically, a carefully maintained work-life balance that gave me time for personal projects and reading. Arya was between marketing coordinator positions for the 4th time in 18 months, though she had a talent for framing each departure as a strategic career pivot rather than admitting she'd been fired for missing deadlines or clashing with supervisors who expected basic accountability. She was magnetic in that unpredictable way that draws people in, spontaneous energy crackling around her like static electricity, always ready with plans for impromptu adventures or last-minute changes that kept everyone around her slightly off balance. During conversations, she was constantly posting Instagram stories from trendy coffee shops and networking events, her phone buzzing with notifications every few minutes while we tried to have dinner, creating this sense that somewhere else was always more interesting than wherever she currently was. I was methodical by nature, preferred quiet evenings reading tech journals or working on coding projects that challenged me intellectually, the type who actually enjoyed debugging complex systems because there was genuine satisfaction in finding logical solutions to intricate problems that had stumped other developers. She told me I was different from other guys she dated, that my stability felt refreshing after a string of relationships with aspiring musicians and freelance photographers who couldn't commit to weekend plans, let alone adult responsibilities like showing up to work consistently or paying rent on time. She made it sound like she'd been searching for someone exactly like me, someone reliable who could provide the foundation she needed to flourish creatively and professionally. Looking back, I realized she wasn't attracted to who I was as a person, she was attracted to what I could provide as a solution to her chronic instability. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but I misinterpreted them as endearing quirks rather than fundamental incompatibilities. Her subletting arrangement collapsed when her roommate decided to move to Portland with her boyfriend, leaving Arya scrambling to find somewhere to crash for what she promised would be just a few weeks while she figured out her next living situation. My downtown loft had plenty of space, and helping her seemed like the natural thing to do for someone I was genuinely falling for, someone who made me laugh and brought unpredictable energy into my carefully structured world. Those few weeks turned into 3 months of her belongings gradually taking over my organized space, expensive makeup scattered across my bathroom counter, clothes I'd helped her afford hanging in my closet, her chaotic energy filling rooms that used to be peaceful refuges from work stress and demanding clients. I even spent entire weekends helping her organize her student loan mess, creating detailed spreadsheets and making calls to servicers because she'd been ignoring the mounting payments for months, treating her financial obligations like suggestions rather than commitments. She was genuinely grateful then, appreciative of having someone who could navigate bureaucratic systems and create order from her self-created chaos, someone who cared enough to invest time and effort in solving problems she'd been avoiding. But gratitude, I learned through painful experience, has a definite expiration date when someone starts taking your efforts for granted and begins looking around for more exciting options. After joining a trendy co-working space as a brand strategist, Arya started attending networking mixers and startup launch parties with colleagues who preached about authentic experiences and refusing to settle for anything less than extraordinary. The shift in her attitude was gradual but unmistakable. She began questioning our quiet evenings together, suggesting that maybe we were getting too comfortable, too predictable for people in their mid-20s who should be exploring all life had to offer instead of falling into premature domestic routines. She met Rex during one of these networking events, a personal trainer at the wellness center her company partnered with for corporate wellness initiatives and employee engagement programs. Suddenly, every conversation included casual mentions of morning boot camps and protein smoothie dates, How Rex understood the importance of pushing boundaries and living authentically rather than settling into boring routines that stifled personal growth and creative expression. I watched her transform from someone who had appreciated the stability I provided into someone who viewed that same stability as a limitation, influenced by coworkers who treated commitment like a dirty word and encouraged each other to keep their romantic options open indefinitely while pursuing personal fulfillment above all else. She started coming home later from these networking events, her phone buzzing constantly with messages she'd glance at with barely concealed excitement before claiming they were just work-related communications that couldn't wait until morning because the startup world never slept. Rex became a recurring character in her daily stories, how he was helping her develop a morning routine that would boost her productivity and align her energy with her professional goals, how his approach to fitness was revolutionizing her energy levels and mental clarity, how he understood the entrepreneurial mindset in ways that people with traditional corporate jobs simply couldn't grasp or appreciate. The comparison was never explicitly stated, but the implication became increasingly clear. I represented the safe, predictable option that provided security but lacked excitement, while Rex embodied the possibility and adventure she was craving as someone determined to live her most authentic life. I started noticing how she'd check her reflection more carefully before leaving for work, how she'd spend extra time getting ready for these networking events, how she'd come home energized in a way that our evenings together hadn't inspired in months. One evening in late September, she approached me with what was clearly a carefully rehearsed speech about needing to explore her romantic options while keeping me as her safety net. Those were her exact words, delivered with the kind of practiced confidence that suggested she'd been discussing this strategy extensively with her coworkers who probably applauded her for being honest about her needs rather than staying trapped in an unfulfilling situation. She explained that she cared about me too much to simply break up without exploring what else might be possible, that what we had built together was too valuable to throw away completely, but that she owed it to herself and to our future to see what other connections might teach her about herself and what she truly wanted from a romantic partnership. The request was presented as a favor to our relationship, a mature way to eliminate any future regrets or what-ifs that might poison our ability to build something lasting together once she'd satisfied her curiosity about other possibilities. She wanted explicit permission to date Rex while maintaining our current living arrangement and emotional connection as her backup plan, assuming I would wait patiently and supportively for her to finish sampling other options and return when she was ready to fully appreciate what she already had with someone who truly understood and accepted her. The audacity of the proposal was almost impressive in its calculated selfishness. She expected me to continue funding her lifestyle and providing emotional support while she explored whether someone else might offer more excitement, better prospects, or a more thrilling version of the security I already provided. She painted it as a mature, honest approach to modern relationships, referencing articles she'd read about ethical non-monogamy and the crucial importance of personal growth through diverse romantic experiences that would ultimately make her a better partner. But beneath all the trendy relationship theory and progressive language was a simple, cold calculation. She wanted to keep the financial security and emotional stability I provided while testing whether Rex or someone else might offer a more exciting alternative, with the clear understanding that I would be waiting patiently whenever she decided to return from her exploration of greener pastures. Instead of arguing or begging like she probably expected based on her past experience with men who fought for her attention, I calmly thanked her for her honesty and told her I needed some time to think carefully about what she'd proposed and what it would mean for both of us moving forward. That night, I spent hours on my couch staring at the ceiling, processing the surreal reality that someone I'd been planning a future with had just asked permission to shop around for my replacement while keeping me as her convenient fallback option in case her exploration didn't yield better results. The more I thought about her proposal, the clearer it became that this wasn't really about personal growth or authentic self-discovery. It was about having her cake and eating it too, maintaining all the financial and emotional benefits of our established relationship while pursuing the excitement and validation she thought she was missing with someone who represented a more thrilling possibility. By morning, I'd made my decision using the same methodical approach I applied to complex security problems at work. Analyze the situation objectively without emotional bias, identify the optimal solution based on available data, and execute the plan efficiently without second-guessing myself or allowing sentiment to cloud my judgment. While Arya packed an overnight bag for what she clearly assumed would be a temporary separation during her romantic experiment, kissing my cheek like we were merely pressing pause on our relationship until she finished sampling other options and returned with a clearer appreciation of what she already had, I was already planning the steps that would permanently alter her expectations about my availability as her safety net. She left for work that Tuesday morning with obvious excitement radiating from her entire demeanor, probably already texting Rex about how understanding and mature I'd been about their new arrangement, how this proved we had the kind of evolved, progressive relationship that could survive anything because of our mutual respect and communication. The moment her car pulled out of the building's parking garage, I called a locksmith and scheduled an emergency rekeying appointment for that same afternoon, explaining that I needed all locks changed immediately due to what I described as a serious security concern that couldn't wait for regular business hours. While waiting for the locksmith to arrive, I systematically went through every room of the apartment collecting every single item that belonged to her, clothes from the closet we'd shared for months, makeup and expensive skincare products scattered across the bathroom counter, books she'd bought but never actually read, decorative items she'd insisted would make the space feel more like home, expensive scented candles she'd purchased with money I'd given her for groceries and practical necessities. I packed everything methodically into sturdy boxes I'd picked up from the office supply store, taking genuine care not to damage anything because I wasn't interested in giving her ammunition to paint me as vindictive or cruel when she inevitably tried to explain this situation to mutual friends or family members who might take her side. The locksmith arrived precisely at 2 in the afternoon, an efficient older man who professionally changed all the locks and provided me with crisp new keys while casually commenting that it was smart security practice to update locks regularly in downtown apartment buildings where so many people had access to common areas. By 4 o'clock, I'd loaded all her belongings into my car and made the drive across town to the address she'd given me for her backup living arrangement, her friend Ashley's apartment where she'd apparently been planning to stay during what she described as her exploration phase of personal and romantic discovery. Ashley wasn't home when I arrived, but her roommate accepted the stack of boxes with visible confusion, asking politely if everything was okay between Arya and me, clearly sensing that something significant had changed in our relationship dynamic. I simply explained that Arya had decided to move out permanently and that these were her personal belongings, thanking the roommate for accepting the delivery before walking away without elaborating on the specific circumstances that had led to this sudden change. The final step in my plan was blocking her phone number completely and systematically removing her from all social media platforms where she might try to reach me with explanations, apologies, or attempts to manipulate me back into the role she'd assigned me as her reliable backup option. I wanted a completely clean break with absolutely no possibility of her talking her way back into my life or making me doubt the decision I'd made based entirely on her own clearly stated intentions and explicitly expressed needs. Arya's exploration of her romantic options imploded spectacularly within 3 weeks, though I only learned the details later through mutual friends who felt compelled to share the drama despite my clear disinterest in her affairs and my repeated requests not to be updated on her situation. Rex turned out to be exactly what you'd expect from someone who pursued a woman in a committed relationship. He was simultaneously dating 2 other women from the co-working space while maintaining an active profile on multiple dating apps. Something Arya discovered when one of her colleagues showed her screenshots of his conversations with other potential conquests where he'd used identical pickup lines and promises of exclusive connection. The confrontation between them became a very public social media meltdown that played out across Instagram stories and Facebook posts, with Arya posting increasingly unhinged rants about men who lied about their intentions and manipulated vulnerable women while Rex responded by blocking her everywhere and telling anyone who would listen that she'd been way too intense and clingy for what was supposed to be a casual situation that she'd completely misunderstood. The fallout from her emotional breakdown cost her a major client contract when her erratic behavior during a crucial presentation convinced the company executives that she lacked the professionalism and emotional stability they required for their brand representation, especially after she broke down crying while discussing their marketing strategy and had to excuse herself from the conference room. Her co-working space friends, who had initially encouraged her romantic exploration as an expression of female empowerment and authentic living, quickly distanced themselves when her dramatic outbursts became a daily disruption to their carefully curated environment of productivity and positive energy that attracted successful freelancers and entrepreneurs. The same colleagues who had applauded her decision to keep her options open suddenly found her constant need for emotional support and validation exhausting, especially when she started showing up to networking events drunk and making scenes that reflected poorly on their professional community and damaged relationships they'd worked hard to build. Her temporary living arrangement with Ashley collapsed when she couldn't cover her share of rent after losing the client contract, and Ashley grew increasingly tired of providing free therapy sessions for someone who refused to take responsibility for the obvious consequences of her own choices while expecting constant reassurance and emotional labor. Ashley had her own demanding career and serious relationship to focus on, and hosting someone who spent every evening crying about her self-inflicted problems while demanding that everyone around her fix the situation became an unsustainable burden that strained their friendship to the breaking point and created tension with Ashley's boyfriend, who was tired of the drama. Arya began an increasingly desperate campaign to reconnect with me through every mutual friend, distant acquaintance, and family member she could think of, starting with casual inquiries about how I was doing and gradually escalating to direct requests that people intervene on her behalf because she'd made a terrible mistake and needed a chance to explain herself properly and make amends. She contacted my sister, my college roommate, even my mother, spinning elaborate stories about how she'd been confused and manipulated by bad influences but had now realized through painful experience that what we shared was too precious to lose over a momentary lapse in judgment caused by outside pressures and her own immaturity. Each person she approached told her the same thing, that I seemed to be doing well and had specifically asked not to receive any updates about her situation, but she persisted in believing that the right messenger delivering the right combination of words could somehow undo the finality of my decision and convince me to reconsider. Her voicemails, which I never listened to but could see accumulating in my blocked messages folder, grew increasingly frantic as the reality sank in that the stable, predictable life she'd so casually discarded wasn't sitting in storage waiting patiently for her return whenever she finished exploring more exciting alternatives. Meanwhile, I was rediscovering aspects of myself that had been suppressed during our relationship, starting with my long-abandoned passion for rock climbing at the indoor gym downtown where I'd started going twice a week after work to challenge myself physically and mentally. The physical challenge and mental focus required for solving climbing routes provided exactly the kind of stress relief I needed, and I found myself making friends with other climbers who shared my methodical approach to problem-solving and goal achievement without the drama and emotional manipulation I'd grown accustomed to tolerating. I also enrolled in evening photography classes at the community college, something I'd been interested in for years but had never pursued because Arya always had social events or networking opportunities that required my attendance and support as her emotional anchor. The photography instructor, an older woman who'd worked for National Geographic, encouraged students to find subjects that genuinely interested them rather than chasing trends or trying to impress others with technically perfect but emotionally hollow images. For the first time in months, I was investing time and energy in activities that fed my own interests and personal growth rather than constantly supporting someone else's shifting priorities and never-ending emotional needs. 3 months after Arya's dramatic exit from my life, I met Lucia at a science museum fundraiser that I attended with my colleague Marcus, who'd been encouraging me to get out more and meet people who shared my intellectual curiosity rather than staying home every weekend nursing old wounds. The event was raising money for new interactive exhibits about cybersecurity and digital privacy, topics that naturally interested me both professionally and personally, so attending felt like a genuine way to support something meaningful rather than forcing myself into social situations that felt artificial or uncomfortable. Lucia was there as a volunteer coordinator, a marine biology researcher who'd helped design the ocean conservation exhibit and was passionate about making complex scientific concepts accessible to general audiences through engaging, hands-on demonstrations. Unlike Arya's chaotic energy that demanded constant attention and validation, Lucia had this calm, thoughtful presence that drew people in naturally. She listened more than she spoke, asked genuinely curious questions about my work in cybersecurity rather than scrolling through her phone, and had this way of making everyone around her feel heard and valued without making it about herself. When I explained what I did for a living, she didn't glaze over or change the subject to something more personally relevant like Arya always had, but instead asked thoughtful questions about how security vulnerabilities develop and whether the same principles that protect computer systems might apply to protecting marine ecosystems from human interference. Our conversation flowed naturally from cybersecurity to ocean conservation to documentary films we'd both enjoyed, discovering shared interests in weekend camping trips and our mutual appreciation for experiences that challenged us intellectually and physically rather than just providing instant gratification or social media content. She told me about her research tracking migration patterns of endangered sea turtles, how she spent weeks at a time on research vessels collecting data that would inform conservation policies, and I found myself genuinely fascinated by someone who dedicated her career to protecting something larger than herself rather than constantly seeking external validation for personal choices. When she mentioned that she was planning a camping trip to Big Bend National Park to photograph the night sky for a research presentation, I surprised myself by offering to share some of the photography techniques I'd been learning in my evening classes, and she immediately invited me to join her if I was seriously interested in combining technical skills with natural science documentation. Our relationship developed organically over the following weeks through shared activities that we both genuinely enjoyed rather than obligations or social performances designed to maintain an image or impress other people. We went on actual camping trips where we spent hours talking about everything from marine conservation to network security while watching sunrise over landscapes that made our daily problems feel appropriately small and manageable. She appreciated my methodical approach to planning these adventures, how I researched optimal camping spots and weather conditions rather than just showing up unprepared and hoping everything would work out, which was such a refreshing change from Arya's constant criticism of my need to think ahead and prepare for contingencies. Meanwhile, Arya's attempts to reconnect with me continued through increasingly desperate means that revealed just how completely she'd misunderstood both my character and the finality of my decision to remove myself from consideration as her backup option. She'd started sending handwritten letters to my apartment, probably hoping that the personal touch would somehow bypass my digital blocks and force me to engage with her emotional appeals about second chances and personal growth. She'd begun showing up at the rock climbing gym where she'd somehow learned I'd been spending time, though she'd never shown any interest in physical fitness during our relationship and clearly had no intention of actually climbing since she just lingered awkwardly in the lobby area hoping to accidentally encounter me. Most pathetically, she'd created fake social media accounts with generic names and stock photo profile pictures to monitor my activities and see if I was posting about new relationships or social situations she might be able to infiltrate or use as leverage to restart contact with me. Not realizing that I'd become much more private about sharing personal information online after learning how easily it could be weaponized by someone with questionable intentions and poor boundaries. The contrast between her desperate, chaotic attempts to force her way back into my life and Lucia's genuine, respectful approach to building our relationship couldn't have been more stark, and it made me realize just how much energy I'd been wasting trying to manage someone else's emotional instability rather than investing in my own growth and happiness with someone who actually valued the same things I did. When Arya spotted Lucia and me together at our mutual friend David's housewarming party 6 months later, I watched her face cycle through surprise, denial, anger, and finally a cold understanding that seemed to freeze her entire expression into something I'd never seen before. Lucia and I had been planning to make only a brief appearance since we both had an early morning hiking trip planned for the next day, but David had specifically asked us to come because he wanted to introduce Lucia to his girlfriend Sarah, who was also involved in environmental research and shared similar professional interests. I'd briefly considered whether Arya might be there since she and David had dated casually years ago, but I decided that avoiding social events indefinitely because of someone who'd chosen to exit my life wasn't a sustainable or healthy approach to rebuilding my social connections with longtime friends. Arya was standing near the kitchen when we arrived, talking animatedly with a group of people I didn't recognize, probably trying to network her way into new professional opportunities since her previous career trajectory had been derailed by her public meltdown and reputation for unreliability among the local marketing community. The moment she saw us together, Her conversation stopped mid-sentence and I watched her face transform as she processed what she was seeing: me, clearly happy and relaxed with someone new, someone who was beautiful and accomplished and obviously comfortable in her own skin without needing constant validation or attention from everyone around her. Lucia was wearing a simple sundress and minimal makeup, carrying herself with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth rather than constantly seeking external confirmation of it, and the contrast with Aria's overstyled appearance and desperate energy was immediately apparent to anyone paying attention. For the rest of the party, I could feel Aria watching us from across the room, studying how Lucia and I interacted with each other and with other guests, probably trying to understand what had changed in me or what this new woman possessed that she herself had apparently lacked. We stayed for exactly the amount of time we'd planned, mingling with David's friends and enjoying conversations about topics that genuinely interested us rather than performing social interactions for the benefit of observers who might be monitoring our behavior for signs of weakness or opportunity. As we were preparing to leave, Aria approached us near the front door with what was clearly a carefully rehearsed speech, though I could see the barely controlled emotion beneath her composed exterior as she struggled to maintain the illusion that this was a casual social encounter rather than a calculated attempt to insert herself back into my awareness. She complimented Lucia on her dress and made small talk about the party, but her eyes kept darting to me with an intensity that made it clear she was really trying to communicate something entirely different than her polite words suggested. 2 days later, I received what would be her final communication, a long email that dropped all pretense of personal growth or mature reflection and revealed exactly what she really thought about me, my choices, and the relationship we'd shared. She called me boring and too comfortable, predicting with bitter certainty that Lucia would eventually crave excitement and leave me just as she had once she realized what I actually had to offer beyond financial stability and predictable routine. According to her analysis, I was the kind of man that women settled for when they got tired of passion and adventure, someone safe and reliable but ultimately unsatisfying for anyone with real ambition or desire for a life worth living. She accused me of choosing Lucia specifically because she seemed less threatening and demanding than someone like herself, someone who wouldn't challenge me to grow or push me outside my comfortable boundaries the way a truly dynamic woman would naturally do through her mere presence and expectations. The email revealed everything I'd suspected but hadn't fully acknowledged during our relationship, that Aria had always viewed stability as weakness, thoughtfulness as boring predictability, and genuine care as evidence of desperation rather than love. She'd never actually valued the qualities that made me a good partner. She'd simply tolerated them as necessary trade-offs for the security and support I provided while she searched for someone who could offer the same benefits plus the excitement she felt entitled to receive. Reading her bitter words, I realized that this email was actually a gift, final confirmation that I'd made exactly the right decision by removing myself from consideration as her backup plan and that the person I'd thought I was building a future with had never actually existed outside my own hopeful imagination and willingness to overlook fundamental incompatibilities. I deleted the email without responding, understanding that her opinion no longer held any power over my self-worth or my decisions about who deserved space in my life, and that engaging with her toxic perspective would only validate her belief that she still had some claim on my emotional energy and attention. At Lucia's engagement celebration 6 months later, surrounded by her research colleagues and marine biology friends who'd become genuinely important people in my life, Aria made one final attempt to insert herself into my narrative and minimize the growth I'd experienced since removing myself from her orbit of chaos and manipulation. The party was being held at Lucia's favorite restaurant near the university, a small place that specialized in sustainable seafood and supported local conservation efforts, exactly the kind of venue that reflected our shared values about supporting businesses that aligned with our principles rather than just choosing the most expensive or Instagram-worthy option available. I was talking with Dr. Martinez, Lucia's research advisor, about cybersecurity applications for protecting marine research data when I noticed Aria approaching our group with that familiar determined expression that meant she'd planned this interaction carefully and wouldn't be deterred by social cues or polite deflection. She looked different than she had at David's party, more polished but somehow diminished, like someone trying too hard to project an image of success that didn't quite match the reality of her situation. which I'd heard through mutual friends had continued to deteriorate as her reputation for professional unreliability made it difficult to secure stable employment in the competitive marketing field. She complimented Lucia on the engagement ring, made appropriate comments about the beautiful venue, and asked polite questions about our wedding plans, but I could see the calculation behind her friendly facade as she tried to find an opening to deliver whatever message she'd come here to share. When Lucia excused herself to thank the restaurant staff for accommodating our large group, Arya seized the opportunity to speak to me directly, dropping the pretense of casual social interaction and revealing the real purpose of her carefully orchestrated appearance at our celebration. She told me that I was settling for safe and predictable, that Lucia seemed nice enough but lacked the dynamic energy and ambitious spirit that would challenge me to become the best version of myself rather than just enabling my natural tendency toward comfortable routine and risk-averse choices. According to her analysis, I'd chosen someone who would never push me outside my comfort zone or demand the kind of growth that comes from being with someone who refuses to settle for mediocrity in any aspect of their shared life together. She suggested that I was afraid of passion and intensity, that I'd deliberately chosen a relationship that felt manageable rather than transformative because I lacked the courage to engage with someone who would truly challenge my assumptions and force me to evolve beyond my current limitations and self-imposed boundaries. Her final accusation was that I'd become someone completely different from the person she'd known, someone who'd traded authenticity for security and personal growth for comfortable stagnation, and that eventually I'd realize what I'd given up in exchange for a relationship that felt safe but would ultimately prove unsatisfying to anyone with real ambition and desire for meaningful connection. I looked at her calmly and explained that she was absolutely right. I had become someone fundamentally different from the person she'd known, but not in the way she imagined or for the reasons she assumed motivated my choices. I'd become someone who understood the difference between stability and stagnation, between authentic partnership and performative relationship dynamics designed to generate external validation rather than internal satisfaction and mutual growth. I'd learned to value consistency over chaos, thoughtfulness over impulsiveness, and genuine care over the kind of manufactured drama that some people mistake for passion because they've never experienced real emotional intimacy built on trust and shared values rather than constant uncertainty and competition. I explained that I was no longer willing to be anyone's backup plan or emotional support system without reciprocation, that I developed clear standards for how I expected to be treated in romantic relationships and wouldn't compromise those boundaries for anyone who viewed my stability as weakness rather than strength. When she accused me of becoming boring and risk-averse, I agreed that I'd become much more selective about which risks were worth taking and which forms of excitement were worth pursuing, having learned through painful experience that not all change represents growth and not all intensity indicates genuine connection or compatibility with my long-term goals and values. As I walked away with Lucia, who'd returned from thanking the restaurant staff and immediately sensed the tension in our conversation, Arya remained frozen by the dessert table, finally beginning to comprehend that the safety net she'd discarded so casually had transformed into something she could never reach again, no matter how many desperate attempts she made to reconnect with a version of me that no longer existed. The story concludes with my reflection on how choosing peace over chaos, stability over drama, and genuine partnership over performative relationship dynamics had led me to discover what authentic happiness actually felt like when shared with someone who valued the same qualities I'd learned to appreciate in myself through the painful process of recovering from emotional manipulation and rebuilding my sense of self-worth on a foundation of mutual respect rather than desperate accommodation of someone else's unrealistic expectations and entitled demands.